engine start. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. Liftoff of the space.
In our natural pursuit of knowledge, space has always mystified and beguiled us. Over the past 5 decades, we've pushed the final frontier inevitably onward into the ether. The cost has been colossal. Now every day, new data, new conclusions, and the thirst for deeper exploration propel us inexorably onward. The advantages of the discoveries made through space travel are myriad, but the fundamental curiosity as to what is out there will always fascinate and torment us. Come with us now into the unknown and discover the disappearing frontier. In this week's show, what has this to do with space? This is part of NASA's experiments in regenerative life support systems capable of sustaining life in space well into the future. Today's feature takes a look at the first operational flights of the STS, or Space Transportation System, better known to us as the Shuttle. As part of proving the commercial viability of NASA's fleet of reusable Earth orbiters, these first flights were primarily engaged with satellite deploy and recovery. So, you probably think that watching the grass grow is boring, of no interest to anyone but livestock and worms. But this experiment, conducted at the Johnson Space Center, was far from dull or of no interest. In fact, these grasses, swaying in the breeze, could be the pointer to harvesting the future of life in space. In this segment, we follow a NASA experiment which literally locked a man in an airtight room for 15 days to let him watch the grass grow. In NASA's continuing endeavors, this very serious experiment was a small part of the search for a life support system that could maintain itself away from Earth over a long time. This man, Nigel Packham, a researcher at the Johnson Space Center, will spend the next 15 days in this small, airtight chamber. The experiment will test for ways to make breathable air where none previously existed, and at the same time testing the capacity of plants to live off the expelled air from people living in close proximity. This experiment is part of the search to create a regenerative life support system for use in space. An essential part of this experiment was to examine the interaction between man and plant. Because not only do you need air to breathe, your food needs its air too. One without the other would eventually result in the death of both. The airtight chamber that Nigel currently calls home is 9 foot by 9 foot. All the amenities of life are in there with him, including computers, phones, emails, and an exercise machine. The purpose of the experiment requires Nigel to live a basically normal life, while in the chamber doing all the things that would normally be done by people living and working away from natural self-generating sources of air. The airlock, which houses Nigel, all his work equipment and personal objects, is attached via a soundproof door to a chamber which houses a variety of wheatgrasses. The rooms are connected by passages which circulate the flow of air from one room to the other and back. Using the age-old process of photosynthesis, the plants will provide oxygen to Nigel and simultaneously remove carbon dioxide from the air. Carbon dioxide produced at increased amounts, particularly during strenuous exercise necessary for the long-term fitness of astronauts, would result in a toxic buildup of CO2 unless breathed in by the plants. The wheat growth chamber requires about as much area to house its 8 baths of wheatgrass as Nigel does to live. It's a fairly high space requirement in a generally space-conscious world. However, on the International Space Station, which will in the not-too-distant future house several people in conditions like these, this seemingly simple experiment could provide a vital ingredient for the long-term survival of man in space. The wheatgrass is grown in several stacked hydroponic baths under the constant light of 3 high-pressure sodium lamps. They can grow a full cycle from seed to harvest in about 90 days, providing fresh air and food along the way. Converting them to frosty flakes is your problem. On the occasions that he enters the wheat growth chamber, Nigel describes it as literally a breath of fresh air. The plants have reacted very well to using Nigel's expelled air and react quickly to changes in his metabolic output. When he exercises, it's like feast time for the plants. Nigel describes it as if the plants know he's there. The experiment, successfully concluded, proved the viability of air regeneration through the interaction of man and plant. However, once the experiment ends, the real work begins, analysing the data. Nigel will now be thoroughly tested to see how his body has reacted to the artificial conditions and the reliance of his body on a single source of oxygen for 15 days. Ah yes, after 15 days, the air smells sweet for Nigel Packham. By looking at ways to create a regenerative life support system capable of maintaining itself and a range of humans living together, NASA may just have designed the ultimate in future homes. An organic, technology hybrid which provides not just shelter, but air and food as well. Our feature today looks at the early shuttle flights, when the STS, or Space Transportation System, was first being refined. The early flights were used mainly as a satellite delivery service, inserting satellites into Earth orbit. We joined the crew of Columbia on their 5th mission into Earth orbit and their first operational flight of the Space Shuttle program. The first 4 flights were test flights to prove the STS missions could provide access to low Earth orbit on a routine basis. Those flights laid the basis for the operational era, and this mission, STS-5, was the first of that era. Their primary mission was to transport 2 satellites into orbit, deploy them, and return to Earth. The astronauts often felt like simple moving men and women, albeit a long way from home. Only minutes after sunrise at Edwards Air Force Base in California, Columbia makes a smooth landing, completing Shuttle Flight 5. Looking a little the worse for wear, the orbiter had traveled over 10.5 million miles in 5 flights. Spent 24 days in orbit and circled the Earth almost 400 times. It would now return to Kennedy Space Center for refurbishment to be launched again on Shuttle Flight 9. The newest orbiter in NASA's fleet, Challenger, would fly on STS-6. Many weight-saving improvements had been made. The orbiter itself was almost 2,500 pounds lighter because of structural changes. The external tank weighed 10,000 pounds less than the one used in Shuttle Flight 1. The solid rocket boosters were almost 4,000 pounds lighter. The 3 main engines were upgraded to 104% of rated thrust, and a blanket-light thermal material replaced 600 thermal tiles in non-critical areas, and all 30,000 tiles were densified to improve their durability. This stack would carry over 17,000 pounds more into orbit than Columbia. On Shuttle Flight 6, Challenger's cargo, the tracking and data relay satellite TDRS, and its solid propellant inertial upper stage rocket, the IUS, weighed almost 19 tons. TDRS was the largest, most advanced satellite launched to this time. TDRS was launched from the payload bay by ejection springs released when explosive bolts were fired. After the shuttle moved a safe distance away, the first stage of the IUS rocket fires to boost the satellite from 150 miles to 22,300 miles in altitude. Then the first stage separated. Shortly thereafter, the second stage of the IUS rocket fired to circularize the satellite's orbit. Solar panels and antennae were deployed to provide power and tracking and data relay capabilities. Having attained a circularized altitude of 22,300 miles, traveling at the same speed as the Earth's rotation, the satellite would remain fixed in place over the same fixed point on Earth for its usable life. Later, the first TDRS would be joined by two more identical satellites. The three satellites were intended to form a space communications network, providing almost continuous coverage to Earth-orbiting spacecraft, as opposed to the 15% ground stations provided. The network was able to track 26 Earth-orbiting spacecraft simultaneously, and because TDRS satellites only relay information, they don't process it, 20 times more information can be handled by this network than can be handled by ground stations. All data is relayed to the primary NASA ground terminal at White Sands, New Mexico, and from there via domestic satellite to other NASA centers. Launch of TDRS was on time and nominal. First stage firing of the inertial upper stage also went well and was happily confirmed by ground terminals at White Sands and Sunnyvale. However, halfway through the second stage of firing, ground controllers lost communication with the satellite. It was an hour before even intermittent signals were picked up. They indicated TDRS had not yet separated from the IUS and that both were tumbling at a very high rate of speed. Receiving only intermittent signals from TDRS using short-life batteries, which would soon be depleted, and getting no response from signals sent from the ground made the outlook for TDRS bleak. Several more hours passed, and then something remarkable happened. Experts to this day are still not sure why, but either an automatic timing mechanism was engaged or onboard systems finally acknowledged and obeyed repeated commands, separating TDRS from the IUS. Now on its own, the satellite stopped tumbling. Ground controllers commanded deployment of the solar array and antennas. However, they quickly learned TDRS was drastically off course and drifting further by the hour. Their only hope of getting it back on course was to use the tiny hydrazine thrusters originally designed for minor attitude and velocity adjustments, not for boosting the 2.5-ton TDRS over 8,500 miles further into space. But at least the satellite was not lost. NASA officials immediately put their plan into effect. Meanwhile, Shuttle Flight 6 continued as planned. This was America's first spacewalk in 9 years. The astronauts were attached by safety tethers to slide wires attached just inside the payload bay. They wore a new design in spacesuits, also called extravehicular mobility units. A portable life support system was worn on the back, finally eliminating the need for a lifeline connected to the orbiter. Continuing their quest for reusability, the suits were not custom built for each astronaut. Tops and bottoms of different sizes could be mixed. They were also more flexible than previous spacesuits, allowing a greater practicality and comfort for extended use in space. Crew removed tools from a storage locker in the front part of the payload bay, then moved aft again. Using a cable run through a winch mounted on the bulkhead, they tied the cradle that had held the IUS. Astronauts demonstrated they could have lowered the cradle manually had commands from onboard failed. Winch operations were tested on the front bulkhead using an exogeny as a load. This was to test how many pounds the winch and line could handle and was part of NASA's investigations into the capacities of the shuttle fleet during operation. Lastly, the tools were restowed and the astronauts re-entered the spacecraft. Perhaps the most visually spectacular mission since the Apollo missions to the Moon, Challenger's Shuttle Flight 7 gave us our first live view of the orbiter in space in action. A European payload called SPARS, or Shuttle Pallet Satellite, provided the magnificent views from a unique reusable space platform built by a West German aerospace company. In addition to having American film and TV cameras mounted on SPARS, 10 experiments belonging to the West German government, the European Space Agency and NASA were on the platform. The test for SPARS was to prove the satellite's design validity and that experiments could be operated successfully, while SPARS was free-flying. NASA wanted to show that the remote manipulator system could handle the 2.5-ton payload. The orbiter's ability to station keep with SPARS was also demonstrated. At this point, they're 1,000 feet apart. Here, SPARS and the shuttle are 200 feet apart. Thrusters on board the shuttle were fired to record the effect on SPARS. Finally, SPARS is rebirthed for return to Earth.
Been told that some crews in the past have announced that we deliver. Well, from Flight 7 we pick up and deliver.
The remark by Shuttle Flight 7's commander that they pick up and deliver meant that not only had the SPARS experiment been successful, but the crew had also deployed 2 communication satellites. A Canadian satellite to be used for one of the world's first direct-to-home satellite pay-TV operations, and an Indonesian satellite designed to increase high-speed data transmission and telecommunication services to that island nation's many remote locations. Shuttle Flight 7 was to be the first shuttle flight to touch down at the Kennedy Space Center, but bad weather conditions didn't allow it. Challenger landed instead at Edwards Air Force Base in California, the pre-designated alternate landing site. During the period of communications blackout, usually lasting about 15 minutes, temperatures on the vehicle's surface reached their peak. The temperature of the red-hot glow seen through Challenger's front windows was about 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit. One astronaut described the view as being inside a furnace. Approximately 2 months after TDRS was first launched from Challenger's cargo bay on STS-6, the final firing needed to place the satellite in its correct orbit was executed. Personnel began immediately to check out communication systems on board and initiate a series of important ground tests with the satellite essential to its operation on upcoming shuttle flights. First use of TDRS was on Challenger's STS Mission 8. Also conducted on Shuttle Flight 8 was checkout of the remote manipulator system and payload flight test article. The 8,500-pound structure was the heaviest object lifted by the arm to date, more than double the weight of any previous payload. Information gathered during the checkout was used to prepare the Solar Max repair mission. On that flight, a 20,000-pound payload would be deployed and an orbiting satellite would be retrieved. Flight 8 marked the 6th successful launch of a satellite by the shuttle. It was an Indian communication satellite which would bring telecommunications, television, badly needed weather information to remote areas of that country. Watch next edition for the final chapter of our look at the early operational shuttle missions in STS-8.